The cold morning wind swept through Seattle's wide streets, dragging dry leaves against the gleaming shop windows, displaying items far too expensive for most passers-by. The glass buildings reflected a city in constant motion, a scene where some struggled for survival and others seemed to swim in money without even realizing the weight they carried. It was there that two completely different worlds were about to collide, and although no one could have predicted it, this encounter would be remembered by all who witnessed it. On one side of this narrative was Ethan Walker, 42, CEO of one of the largest financial consulting firms on the West Coast. Extremely tall, always impeccably dressed, he walked with a sense of urgency and power, as if the world had to make room for him. He was known for his aggressive business vision, for motivational speeches that went viral, and especially for the phrase he arrogantly repeated, "I can, because I have," always delivered with that crooked smile, which summed up his philosophy of life. Ethan didn't just make money, he collected it like a trophy. On the other side was Liam Carter, a boy of only 14, thin, dressed too simply for the Washington winter, always with his hands in his pockets trying to warm his fingers. He lived with his mother in a small rented apartment where each bill was a battle and each month a war. The boy had something that few noticed immediately, an absurdly sharp mind. He didn't have expensive laptops, he didn't have state-of-the-art books, nor access to private tutors, but he had observation skills, logic, and an insatiable curiosity. Often before going to school, he would watch Ethan Walker's lectures on the broken screen of a tablet he recovered from a junkyard. Not out of admiration, but to try to understand how someone so rich could speak with such conviction about limits he had never faced. That Friday, Seattle was awash with giant banners advertising an annual event that mobilized the entire city. The Global Mind Summit, an international gathering of over 50 experts from diverse fields: economics, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, engineering, psychology. It was the kind of event where CEOs competed for visibility, investors vied for attention, and speakers sought recognition. Ethan Walker was one of the confirmed stars, more for his impactful phrases than for his theoretical depth. Liam only knew the event existed because he passed by the convention center while delivering newspapers at 6 a.m., as he did every day to help his mother. He stopped for a few seconds in front of the banner, admiring the air-conditioned building, clean carpets, and well-dressed people. It all seemed like an unreachable universe, but something inside him burned. He wanted to go in, not to be seen, but to see, to understand, to learn. The contrast between the two characters began to emerge when Ethan, inside his limousine, observed Liam's small figure from that same side of the street. He chuckled to himself, a short, almost automatic laugh, as he watched the boy balancing stacks of newspapers while battling the wind. To him, that kind of life represented failure, lack of effort, incompetence, thoughts he would never admit aloud, but which fueled his arrogance. However, while Ethan was heading to the opening of the event, Liam made an impulsive decision that would completely change his life. He saw a group of well-dressed students entering the building. They showed their credentials to the security guard, and Liam noticed that under the blue stripe there was a simple code he could memorize. He waited for the exact moment, observing the repeated pattern of how the credentials were validated. In less than 10 seconds, he understood the system. It was an authentication method based on 3 digits and a symbol, something far too weak for an event of that size. He took a deep breath, walked to the security guard with steps that tried to appear confident, and repeated the pattern he had memorized. The guard scanned the device. He blew the green light. Liam went inside. The vastness of the convention center seemed like another planet. LED walls displayed impactful phrases. Innovation is power. Challenge your limits. You can do anything. Liam walked past them with attentive eyes, not out of motivation, but trying to absorb every possible piece of information. One table displayed advanced devices. Others showcased robots, prototypes, complex systems, while experts spoke enthusiastically. It was in this environment that the two worlds collided for the first time. Ethan had gone up on stage to begin his lecture. The audience settled in. Dozens of notable experts positioned themselves in the front rows. Liam, still invisible in the crowd, moved close enough to hear every word. Ethan raised his chin and said loudly with his famous arrogant smile, "I can. You can. Anyone can. You just have to want to." The audience applauded. Liam did not applaud. While Ethan spoke about merit, success, and discipline, concepts that sounded empty when repeated by someone who had never faced true need, Liam observed a curious pattern on the screens behind him. The interactive system that would display audience questions had a subtle, almost imperceptible flaw. In his pocket, Liam kept the broken tablet that barely worked, but which, if activated at the right moment, could access that information. The friction between the characters wasn't just economic, it was moral, ethical. It was the inevitable clash between someone who believed that wealth defined value and a boy who had learned, through hardship, that true value came from what no one could take away: intelligence, instinct, courage. And then the element of mystery began to take shape. That glitch in the system wasn't just a technical error, it was an opportunity. Something inside Liam told him it wasn't a coincidence, but he didn't yet know how far it would go. He took a deep breath, and he decided that he would do something that day that no one would forget. The interior of the convention center resembled a city of its own, structured with wide corridors, digital panels, and carefully designed themed areas. Each sector represented an area of knowledge: advanced engineering, applied neuroscience, social innovation, robotics, finance, and futurism. People walked with purpose, as if every minute there was too valuable to be wasted. The atmosphere was sophisticated, illuminated with cool white lights that gave the feeling that everything there needed to be rational, efficient, and precise. Despite feeling out of place, Liam moved with the ease of someone accustomed to entering places he shouldn't. His eyes scanned every detail, absorbing everything. He silently walked past experts discussing optimization algorithms, complex financial models, and market trends. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. He had a natural talent for identifying patterns, gestures, hesitations, characteristics that, combined with his constant curiosity, allowed him to quickly grasp what was happening around him. Meanwhile, Ethan navigated the event as if he owned it. People approached him to greet him, ask for selfies, and inquire about investments. He responded with prepared phrases, always striving to maintain his impeccable image. His presence exuded confidence, but there was another layer there, a constant need for validation, an insatiable desire to be perceived as superior. It wasn't just ambition, it was a way of keeping alive the myth he had created about himself. Around him, two aides carried folders and agendas, and a film crew followed his every move to record content that would be posted on social media. "Show confidence, show power, show that you won," he repeated mentally. And every gesture he made was calculated to convey exactly that. But there was a third important character in that scenario: Nathan Hale, director of the event's technology security sector. Tall, short beard, stern gaze. He was known for being obsessively rigorous with protocols, someone who didn't tolerate mistakes, and who took the job of maintaining order at events of that magnitude very seriously. He walked the corridors, observing everything, talking to the technicians, checking systems. And his attention began to increase when discreet reports emerged, showing that an external device had been detected in the stage's interactive question system. They still didn't know who it was. They didn't know its origin. They only knew that there was an anomaly. And somehow, this made the atmosphere of the event more tense, even without anyone around realizing it. Meanwhile, Liam approached an engineering booth focused on solving real-world problems. A Mexican engineer was demonstrating a sensor technology that detected structural movements in bridges and buildings. The boy watched silently, absorbing the explanation, and noticed something that escaped most. A tiny error in the calibration algorithm displayed on the screen. Nothing serious, but enough to generate inconsistent readings. "Sensor 2 will interpret a false vibration," he commented quietly, believing that no one would hear. The engineer turned to him with raised eyebrows. "How do you know that?" she asked, surprised. Liam stood motionless. He shouldn't have spoken. "It just seemed logical," he replied, trying to sound casual. She quickly typed a few commands, tested the module, and her eyes widened as she confirmed that the boy was right. "Boy, that's quite impressive," she said. Liam smiled slightly, but quickly turned away. He didn't want to draw attention, not there. The engineer followed him with her eyes, intrigued, but was interrupted by a call from the organization. Ethan, on the other hand, was in a private room giving quick interviews. Seated in a leather armchair, he answered questions about success, vision, and leadership with his usual confidence. But his answers became part of the event's scenery when they began appearing on screens in other areas, reinforcing his image as the morning star. In contrast, Liam wandered through less busy corridors, trying to understand the internal structure of the systems that displayed information on the screens. He noticed something that few people would. The flaw he had detected earlier was not isolated. It was a structural error in the digital architecture. A misconfigured piece connected systems that should have been separate. A gap too small for a busy adult to notice, too big for an observant boy to ignore. Something was wrong with that organization, but he didn't know what. In the main hall, Nathan Hale was trying to locate the source of the interference. He went through logs, cross-referenced data, checked access logs, until his gaze caught something that put him on alert, an authorization that didn't match any official visitor. It belonged to someone who had entered as a student, but the code didn't belong to any school on the list. He frowned. The intruder was inside. At the other end of the event, Ethan was preparing to participate in a panel with international experts. It would be a debate on modern meritocracy. There were 50 experts present, economists, scientists, brilliant researchers, people who were there for academic recognition. Ethan, however, was there for fame, and that bothered him, even if he never admitted it. Liam watched the stage from afar, hidden among the rows, absorbing the dynamics of the people, the interactions, the flow of conversations. He didn't yet know that his presence was beginning to cause silent ripples in that ocean of knowledge and ego. But he knew that if he wanted to do something important that day, the moment was drawing near. The main hall buzzed with anticipation as the 50 experts took their places on the circular stage set up in the center of the auditorium. The high ceiling reflected the directed lights, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere, as if everyone there was about to witness something grand, though no one knew exactly what. The audience settled in silence, cell phones pointed, cameras adjusted, journalists ready to record every word. Ethan Walker entered the stage with firm steps, a calculated smile, and the impeccable posture of someone who believes he was born to be observed. He greeted some of the speakers with quick nods, but his gaze betrayed his old arrogance. He didn't see them as equals, but rather as stepping stones, tools to reinforce his public image. Meanwhile, hidden among the highest rows of the auditorium, Liam Carter kept his head down, trying not to draw attention. I closely observed the event's control panel, a complex digital structure designed to display questions in real time. He had already understood that the flaw he had detected was not just a loophole, it was practically an unlocked door. And more importantly, that flaw shouldn't have existed. The security level was far below standard for an event of that magnitude. indicating that it wasn't mere chance. Someone inside had done a shoddy job or had an interest in making the system easily manipulable. Nathan Hale, however, was getting closer and closer to discovering the intruder. He walked the corridors with a tablet, tracking the unauthorized signal. His rigid expression betrayed his growing irritation. Nothing escaped his control, and the idea that someone had breached the event's security bothered him to the point of reacting almost like a bloodhound after its prey. The atmosphere on stage was tense. The 50 experts discussed amongst themselves, reviewed papers, and adjusted microphones. The roundtable discussion was to begin with a simple question, projected on the screen behind them. What truly defines merit in modern society? It was the perfect kind of question for Ethan to shine, to deliver his prepared lines, to easily elicit applause, and he knew it. As he smiled for the cameras, he adjusted his jacket with a confidence bordering on ostentation. But Liam observed from a different perspective. He saw patterns of behavior, disguised nervousness, arrogance hidden beneath calculated gestures, and above all, he saw the opportunity forming before him. The part of his mind that functioned like an observation machine was on high alert. The moderator initiated the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will discuss the role of meritocracy in the modern world. To begin, I would like each of you to share your initial thoughts. The first speakers were renowned experts, economists, sociologists, professionals recognized for years of study and research. Their answers were profound, dense, based on complex analyses. Liam observed everything in silence, absorbing knowledge even without having the theoretical tools to fully understand it. When it was Ethan's turn, the audience seemed to hold their breath. Meritocracy, he began, holding the microphone firmly, is about one thing: choice. Those who want to do, those who can achieve, the rest. He paused dramatically. It's an excuse. Some applauded, others merely frowned, and there, in that instant, something changed inside Liam. He felt his chest heat up, as if a silent indignation were taking shape. The phrase sounded beautiful, powerful, but it was empty to someone who knew the true weight of the hardship. Liam lowered his head and discreetly turned on the broken tablet. The screen flickered, threatening to malfunction, but then lit up with a dim glow. He typed a few simple commands and accessed the event's question system. The breach was still open, which meant he could send in any question, and it would appear as if it had officially come from the audience. But Liam didn't want to humiliate anyone. He didn't want to show off. He wasn't seeking fame or attention. He just wanted the truth, or at least a fragment of it, to be heard. However, before she could write anything, a shadow quickly passed by the row where she was standing. Nathan Hale. He walked slowly, looking from seat to seat. The tablet in his hand showed an active signal precisely in that area. Liam swallowed hard. He couldn't stay there, but he also couldn't get up, as that would draw attention. So, with a swift movement, he switched off the tablet, slid it under his jacket, and tried to appear as just another curious teenager watching the debate. On stage, the discussion was starting to heat up. One of the experts firmly countered Ethan. The idea that wanting is all it takes doesn't consider structural inequalities, he said. Access to education, health, opportunities. Ethan smiled disdainfully. Sorry. The audience reacted with mixed reactions. The intellectual conflict intensified. It was clear that Ethan wasn't there for the knowledge, but for the image, and every word reinforced that. Nathan Hale was now just 3 rows behind Liam. He was analyzing signs, observing faces, searching for any suspicious movement. His sharp gaze left no one in the dark. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly to focus on the stage, and Liam realized it was the perfect moment. With an almost imperceptible gesture, he turned the tablet back on, just for a few seconds. He quickly typed a direct, impactful question, impossible to ignore. If merit was simply a matter of wanting it, Why do people with more resources fail as often as poor people? He sent it. The system accepted it instantly. And then, on the main screen, in front of 50 experts, hundreds of spectators, and Ethan Walker, the question came up. A murmur echoed through the room. Ethan froze. The mediator frowned. The experts exchanged glances. And the moment that question filled the room, something bigger began to take shape. A conflict that would leave deep scars on everyone involved. The silence that fell over the auditorium after the unexpected question arose was not merely awkward. It was almost electric, as if each person there had felt an internal shock. The moderator tried to regain control, clearing his throat and adjusting the papers, but the impact had already settled in the rows, creating a wave of murmurs that echoed in every corner of the hall. The 50 experts, previously so focused on their own lines of reasoning, stared at the screen as if it had thrown a personal provocation. The question was simple, but powerful, and it struck directly at the heart of the discussion. Some experts seemed intrigued, others uncomfortable. It was obvious that the phrase had come from someone who had been observing the debate attentively, and more than that, from someone who understood the weakness of Ethan's argument. Ethan himself was motionless. His once confident expression now had subtle cracks. His eyes scanned the audience as if searching for an unseen culprit. It was as if his perfect narrative had been torn apart right in the middle of the stage. Meanwhile, Liam tried to keep his head down, but he felt his heart pounding so hard it seemed everyone around him could hear it. He hadn't expected to have such an impact. He knew the weight of the question, but he hadn't imagined it would hit so hard. And especially, he hadn't imagined Ethan would react so visibly. At the same time, Nathan Hale was getting closer and closer to the source of the intruding signal. His tablet showed an approximate, but not exact, location. He knew he was just a few meters away from the culprit. He discreetly observed each person in the row where Liam was. Children, teenagers, adults. No one escaped his gaze. But Liam, with his simple face and withdrawn posture, seemed so ordinary that Nathan hesitated for a moment, believing that the intruder must be someone technically more skilled. This gave the boy a few precious seconds. As the debate on stage began to react to the question, a subplot unfolded among the experts themselves. Some of them, bothered by Ethan's arrogant attitude, seized the opportunity to elaborate on criticisms they had been harboring for some time. An Italian sociologist took the floor, firmly and directly. The assertion that merit boils down to wanting something ignores the contexts that shape our lives. These aren't excuses, but realities. The question displayed on the screen encapsulates the complexity we insist on simplifying. Other experts agreed. A Mexican economics professor added, "Failure doesn't discriminate based on social class, but resources determine who can recover after it." The camera lenses captured every reaction, and the social networks connected to the event system began to move like small digital eruptions. The words projected on the screen went viral in seconds. Hashtags formed. Comments appeared in torrents. Attention was no longer on the content of Ethan's lecture. It was on the anonymous question that emerged as a kind of indirect denunciation. Ethan realized something very dangerous. For the first time in years, he wasn't controlling the narrative. He tried to respond, attempting to regain control with his rehearsed smile, but his voice faltered in the first few seconds. He swallowed hard, adjusted the microphone, and began. "I believe that some people exaggerate the obstacles. There are examples of people who succeeded, even coming from nothing, but it seemed that every word he uttered met with resistance. The audience didn't react the same way. The cameras no longer captured applause, but rather expressions of doubt. Experts who had previously aligned with him now looked at him as if analyzing his rhetoric with a magnifying glass. It was the beginning of a decline, small but noticeable. While the stage was buzzing, another subplot was unfolding backstage. The Mexican engineer who had spoken to Liam earlier received an internal system notification. There was a risk of an active digital intrusion. She wasn't part of the security team, but she was knowledgeable enough to understand that this wasn't a random glitch. And for some reason she couldn't explain, her thoughts returned to the boy who had pointed out an error in the sensor algorithm minutes before. Could it have been him, she thought, but quickly dismissed the idea. No, impossible. Back in the auditorium, Nathan Hale finally reached the exact aisle. His gaze swept intensely across each seat. He was convinced he would find someone with a device in their hand. But Liam kept his tablet switched off and hidden, without moving. The tension was almost unbearable. At that moment on stage, a Dutch anthropologist raised a provocative question. What if we're discussing merit from a limited perspective? Perhaps we should consider that opportunities only exist for those who have open doors, and someone opens them. The words were an indirect response to what Liam had provoked, a profound reflection that placed even more weight on the original question. The moderator tried to reorganize the debate, but he no longer had complete control. Experts were talking amongst themselves, the audience was commenting, journalists were typing frantically, and Ethan was losing ground. It was the first time in his life that a simple phrase, coming from a stranger, had dismantled his carefully constructed structure, and with that, the first cracks in the larger conflict began to open, cracks that would widen, involving not only him and Liam, but everyone who was at that event. The silent chaos had begun. The murmur of the auditorium transformed into an audible buzz, growing like waves about to break. Ethan Walker, however much he tried to maintain his composure, felt the weight of the collective gaze upon him. Each expert present now looked at him not only as a speaker, but as someone who had suddenly been unequivocally questioned about his own authority. His confidence, which until then had seemed unshakable, began to tremble. Liam Carter, still hidden among the higher rows, held his breath. He hadn't expected the reaction to be so intense, but he knew he had planted the seed of something bigger. Each expert who responded to his question reinforced the impact, and in that instant, the boy realized that his action, minimal and silent, could generate a real change in the narrative flow of that event. The moderator tried to restore order, gesturing with his hands, adjusting microphones, repeating names and invitations for the speakers to speak. But each attempt to control the situation seemed futile. The turning point wasn't just what was happening on stage, it was the collective perception that Ethan's narrative, carefully constructed over years, was being publicly and uncontrollably questioned. At that moment, Nathan Hale acted decisively. He approached Liam with silent, almost feline steps, while analyzing the flow of the intercepted signal on the boy's tablet. His intense and precise gaze swept over every face near the auditorium. And then, finally, he found the point. Liam, motionless, almost imperceptible. The teenager seemed too small to be a threat, but Nathan knew that the danger could not be underestimated. He advanced cautiously, remaining calm, while an almost palpable tension built around them. Liam noticed the approach, but kept the tablet hidden and switched off, trying not to show any reaction. Adrenaline pulsed through his body, but his mind remained sharp. He knew that any wrong move could jeopardize everything he had planned. Meanwhile, Ethan on stage began to feel the domino effect of his loss of control. Experts raised critical points, questioning concepts, provoking reflections that went far beyond what he could absorb. Each intervention was a reminder that wealth did not guarantee intellectual authority. His speech, once confident and incisive, now dissolved in the face of solid arguments. Then came the first twist. A renowned expert, whose opinion was often considered final in debates on merit and economics, did something unexpected. He leaned forward, looked directly at Ethan and said, "The question posed on the screen is not only valid, it's crucial. It highlights a flaw in how we understand the concept of merit in our society. There are no excuses. The impact was immediate. The audience held their breath. Some whispered, others frantically typed on their cell phones, and the live stream captured every reaction. Ethan felt the pressure mounting. No matter how hard he tried to articulate a convincing response, the depth of the expert's observation put him on the defensive for the first time. At that moment, Liam saw a bigger opportunity. He had studied debate patterns, micro-expressions, and narrative flow without formal training, simply by observing. And he saw that he could intensify the effect without having to go on stage or expose himself. He turned the tablet back on, this time sending a second question, even more direct and provocative. If success depends solely on willpower, why do people with unlimited access to power and resources continue to fail? The screen flickered before displaying the message. A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. Ethan's eyes widened. The experts exchanged surprised, intense glances. Nathan Hale watched everything intently, now aware that the digital intruder was active right before his eyes, but he still hadn't reacted rashly. The atmosphere had completely changed. The audience was no longer just questioning Ethan. They were witnessing the public dismantling of his narrative, layer by layer, without him being able to effectively intervene. Every word typed by Liam acted as a stone thrown against the wall of pride and authority built by Ethan. That's when the unexpected revelation came. The Mexican engineer who had been accompanying Liam discreetly approached, whispering to Nathan Hale, "He's just a kid, and he managed to access the event's most protected system with minimal resources. If we want to intervene, we need to be quick." Nathan analyzed the situation. Liam, despite his young age, demonstrated abilities that far exceeded what was expected for someone his age. The turning point was complete. The ordinary teenager, whom no one would notice in real life, had created a direct and irreversible impact on experts, speakers, and the dominant narrative of the event. Ethan, realizing the devastating effect of Liam's interventions, tried to regain control. "I can answer, I can explain," but his voice sounded forced, disjointed. Social media, live viewers, and the entire auditorium had already absorbed the effect of the questions. What should have been a controlled lecture became a stage for unintentional intellectual confrontation, led by a humble and invisible boy. At that same instant, Liam, still hiding, felt the adrenaline rush through his body. He hadn't intended to humiliate anyone. He just wanted the truth to be heard. And now, without realizing it, he had completely changed the course of events. The auditorium was buzzing, the experts divided between support and shock, and Ethan confronting for the first time the possibility that wealth and power were not synonymous with absolute control. The turning point had been established. A seemingly ordinary boy had changed the course of the entire event in seconds, defying expectations, exposing flaws, and forcing a collective reflection that no one could ignore. The central conflict was no longer just about merit or power. It was about perception, skill, and courage, and about the fragility of narratives built solely on authority and image. The auditorium remained in a near-chaotic state. The impact of the questions sent by Liam spread rapidly, like a wave sweeping through each row of spectators. Ethan Walker, once confident and proud, now felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Every word he spoke sounded pointless. Every gesture seemed insufficient in the face of the simple and sharp logic of the questions projected on the screen. The experts, who until moments before had been focused on their own presentations, began to move unexpectedly. Some whispered amongst themselves, others pointed to the screen, discreetly commenting on the contrast between theory and practice. An American economics professor, known for his frankness, stood up and approached the microphone. "This changes everything. We cannot ignore the perspective presented. It exposes flaws we never imagined existed in this system of debate. The audience, in turn, began to react with restrained applause, murmurs of approval, and admiring glances at the little protagonist who, invisible in the audience, manipulated the flow of the narrative without being noticed. Social media transformed each reaction into an instant viral phenomenon. Short videos showed the moment when Ethan froze in front of the screen, excerpts from the experts' speeches, and the question that had caused the commotion. Nathan Hale, for his part, acted with quiet efficiency. He had located Liam and knew he needed to intervene before something worse happened. Every step the boy took was analyzed with precision, every reaction measured. But Nathan noticed something curious. Liam showed no arrogance or intention to harm anyone. He seemed only interested in provoking reflection. It was a break from the norm that made any rash action inappropriate. Ethan sat on the stage, adjusting the microphone, but his voice sounded weak. I thought this would be a constructive debate, but I realize now that I'm being challenged in an unexpected way. The experts exchanged glances. Some nodded, acknowledging the unintentional sincerity of the statement. Others remained silent, attentive to the next words. The tension was rising, but there was no longer complete control over the flow of the narrative. Ethan's leadership and authority were shaken. Meanwhile, Liam continued observing the movements on stage, discreetly monitoring the interactions. He realized that the engineering of the situation had created unforeseen consequences. Teenage colleagues, event staff, and even less prominent experts began questioning internal protocols, suggesting improvements that had never been discussed. The influence of his actions had ramifications that went far beyond what he could have imagined. Behind the scenes, the Mexican engineer who had spoken with Liam earlier discreetly alerted the digital security team about the vulnerabilities. They quickly reviewed logs, analyzing every entry, every command, every possible manipulation. Nathan Hale coordinated the process with precision, ensuring that the intervention was sufficient to prevent greater risks, but without interrupting the impact of what Liam had already caused. Meanwhile, Ethan was trying to recover. He stood up again, taking a deep breath, and made an attempt to regain control. I can explain my vision better. Meritocracy isn't just about resources, but about attitude. But the words didn't have the desired effect. The audience had already absorbed the dynamic created by the boy, and the perception of absolute power that Ethan had cultivated for years was beginning to crumble. Each expert who reinforced the arguments presented on the screen increased the effect, broadening the reach of Liam's unintentional lesson. The most immediate consequence was not only to Ethan's reputation, but to the collective perception of the event. The narrative of absolute power and authority, until then unquestionable, was showing its cracks. Participants began to reflect on the difference between appearance and substance, between real knowledge and prepared discourse. The discussions became deeper, more sincere, less superficial. And while the auditorium breathed in the weight of the changes, Liam felt a strange mix of relief and tension. He knew he had triggered a significant transformation, but he was also aware that the increased visibility heightened the risks. Nathan Hale was watching closely. Ethan was vulnerable, and the experts were observing every move with critical eyes. The balance had shifted, and the next step would determine the outcome. The turning point, now solidified, brought immediate and unpredictable consequences. Ethan was no longer the absolute center of attention. Liam, even in hiding, had altered the dynamic, creating multiple ramifications: ethical questions, public criticism, individual reflections, and debates about real meritocracy. Each action in the auditorium triggered new, complex, and interconnected reactions, showing that a single act, even coming from someone seemingly insignificant, could have a colossal impact. The event would never be the same again, and everyone involved realized, consciously or unconsciously, that they had witnessed something extraordinary: the victory of intelligence and observation over arrogance and established power. The atmosphere in the auditorium, though still heavy with tension, was beginning to transform. The impact of Liam's actions had established a new dynamic. The humble boy, who had previously hidden in the shadows of the event, was now aware of his ability to influence the course of events. But true growth wouldn't come from a single act. It would come from the challenges that would arise before him. After the initial wave of reactions to the questions, Liam realized he needed to think beyond the surface. He couldn't just react. He needed to plan strategically. Observing the environment, understanding the behavioral patterns of those around him, and anticipating possible responses became his main focus. Every expert who murmured, every gesture from Ethan, every movement of the event staff was now a piece of a larger puzzle he needed to assemble. Meanwhile, Ethan, still shaken, tried to maintain his composure. The loss of control forced him to reflect on his own failings, albeit silently, internally, and not evident to anyone. He realized for the first time that charisma and money are no substitute for preparation, attention to detail, and empathy. But pride was still an obstacle. Any misstep could transform reflection into resistance. Nathan Hale, observing Liam's progress, began to adopt a different stance. Previously strict and intimidating, he now saw the teenager not as a threat, but as a unique talent. He understood that the boy's growth wasn't just about isolated actions, but about his ability to read and adapt to a complex environment. Nathan decided to monitor him closely, not to punish, but to protect and guide him should intervention be necessary. On stage, the discussion continued to unfold. Experts used Liam's question as a starting point for deeper debates about inequality, opportunity, and meritocracy. Each argument reinforced the audience's perception, the difference between theory and practice, between discourse and reality. Liam, hidden away, observed attentively. He understood that now it was necessary to act subtly. He could no longer be just a shocker, but an indirect conductor of collective reflection. Then came the next challenge. An unexpected technical problem arose. The systems that had been manipulated to project Liam's questions began to malfunction. Screens flickered, failure alerts appeared on the control monitors, and an event team scrambled to identify the cause. It was the moment when Liam needed to demonstrate not only intelligence, but also composure and strategy. He realized that if he acted rashly, he could compromise the entire system and draw negative attention to himself. With steady hands, he quickly switched off the main tablet and used the backup hidden in his jacket. In seconds, he restored control without anyone noticing. This silent action demonstrated something crucial. True growth is not just skill, but also emotional control and the ability to operate under pressure. Meanwhile, observing the scene, Nathan Hale leaned discreetly toward the Mexican engineer he had met earlier and commented, "He's not just clever, he's calculating, but without arrogance. That kind of ability, combined with ethics, is rare." Ethan, on the other hand, felt the need to adapt. For the first time, his instinct wasn't simply to react with pride or empty defenses. He began to listen to the experts more attentively, to reconsider his own assertions, and to realize that the narrative he had built over the years needed adjusting, not just for the audience, but for himself. This was his first sign of growth, admitting, even if only internally, that the perspective of others could be valid. The audience, in turn, began to notice subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. His arrogance diminished, giving way to genuine reflection. And, although Liam remained invisible to everyone, each of his actions provoked tangible effects. Questions that instigated deeper debates, adjustments to the flow of presentations, and questions about ethics, meritocracy, and social justice. With each new challenge, Liam grew more confident in his ability to influence without needing to be in the spotlight. He learned that true impact doesn't require the limelight, but a strategic understanding of the environment and the ability to act assertively, thoughtfully, and ethically. His growth wasn't just intellectual but also emotional. He learned to handle pressure, tension, and risk assessment in a balanced way. As the event drew to a close, Liam felt something new. Not fear, not anxiety, but a quiet clarity. He understood that every choice shaped not only the immediate outcome, but the perceptions, attitudes, and decisions of everyone around him. Growth, ultimately, wasn't just about overcoming a challenge. It was about understanding the extent of its impact and acting responsibly. And by the time the next debate on stage began, Liam was no longer just an observer. He had become a silent conductor, shaping outcomes, influencing thoughts, and above all, learning that true success requires a balance between intelligence, strategy, and ethics. The auditorium now breathed an almost palpable tension. Liam's questions and the experts' interventions had generated a domino effect that no one could ignore. Ethan Walker, although trying to regain authority, realized that his every gesture was being observed, analyzed, and often mentally criticized by the audience. The narrative he had controlled for years was slowly fragmenting, and each fragment exposed his flaws in perception and arrogance. Meanwhile, Liam remained strategic. He knew the moment to act definitively hadn't yet arrived, but every detail of the event was an opportunity to prepare the ground for maximum impact. He observed Ethan's facial expressions, the murmurs of the audience, the positioning of the experts, and even the micro-reactions of the technical team, anticipating every possible outcome. Nathan Hale, recognizing the boy's intelligence and precision, decided to observe Liam's every move without directly intervening. He understood that any premature action could alter the natural dynamics of the confrontation and compromise the collective learning process. Thus, he became a silent guardian, allowing Liam to develop his plan autonomously, but ready to act if the situation got out of control. Meanwhile, secondary subplots began to gradually resolve themselves. Experts who initially seemed neutral or hesitant began to take a stand, openly discussing concepts that reinforced the line of reasoning behind those critical questions. The Mexican engineer and some of the event's technicians, who had identified flaws in the system, worked discreetly to stabilize the digital processes without the public noticing. Each action, though small and almost invisible, contributed to a controlled increase in tension, setting the stage for the climax. Ethan, increasingly pressured, tried to reorganize his arguments. He realized that speaking assertively wouldn't be enough. He needed to respond strategically. But even so, his attempts were mentally intercepted by the audience and the experts, who already knew his weaknesses. What should have been his great presentation became a test of endurance, requiring him to adapt his behavior in real time. The audience, in turn, began to sense the build-up to a decisive moment. Each exchange between the experts, each question sent by Liam, each hesitation from Ethan created a growing expectation. The pace of the event accelerated organically. No one spoke excessively, but each word carried weight. The narrative tension was felt in every collective breath. Liam realized it was time for a more subtle approach. He needed to solidify his effect without exposing himself. He discreetly typed a series of planned, short, strategic questions that would appear on the screen in a staggered fashion. Each one touched on a critical point of Ethan's authority, exposing contradictions and inconsistencies without provoking an immediate direct reaction. It was like igniting small sparks that, together, could trigger an impactful explosion at the right moment. Ethan began to notice the pattern. Each time he tried to move forward, he was hampered by new provocations. His responses needed to be quicker and quicker, but the pressure increased proportionally. He began to sweat, nervously adjusting his jacket, seeking visual support from the experts. But every gesture revealed vulnerability, and the audience picked up on every signal. Nathan Hale, maintaining a strategic distance, analyzed the escalation. He knew the climax was near, and that the collective reaction would be decisive. Liam, though young, had managed to control the flow of events impressively. It was a lesson in observation, strategy, and intelligence applied under pressure. The previously scattered subplots converged on the same point. The system's engineering, the expert's stance, the audience's reactions, and Ethan's vulnerability were all interconnected. Everything pointed to the moment when the tension would reach its peak. Liam, silent and calculating, maintained control. He no longer needed to worry only about the immediate effects. He could predict the audience's reaction, Ethan's change of attitude, and even the dynamics between the experts. And then, when every element was in place, when every narrative thread converged toward the final explosion, Liam realized that the climax was about to unfold. It was the moment when every action, every observation, and every decision would become irreversible. The stage was set, the audience was attentive, Ethan was vulnerable, the experts were ready to react, and Liam discreetly held the key that would trigger the culminating point of the entire event. The next moment would define not only the outcome of the lecture, but also the shift in perceptions of power, merit, and authority. And behind the curtains, the tension grew like a thread stretched to its limit, ready to snap and plunge everyone involved into an unforgettable moment. The air in the auditorium seemed to vibrate with each passing second. Liam, still invisible to the audience, attentively observed every reaction. The experts were now divided, some reinforcing the validity of the boys' questions, others trying to keep Ethan's narrative intact. The stage transformed into a field of pure tension. Words, gestures, and glances carried the weight of an invisible battle, where every decision could alter the fate of everyone there. Ethan Walker, finally aware of the magnitude of the challenge, felt his confidence completely crumble. The screen, which until then had projected subtle questions, now displayed a sequence planned by Liam, a series of interconnected provocations that dismantled, piece by piece, the millionaire's rhetoric. Each question was direct, challenging, and merciless, exposing contradictions, flaws in reasoning, and veiled arrogance. Ethan tried to react, but every word he uttered seemed insufficient in the face of the simple and clear logic unfolding on the screen. The public began to grasp the magnitude of the situation. Murmurs turned into exclamations, cell phones emerged to record every moment, and experts began to take a firmer stance. Some applauded discreetly, recognizing the intelligence behind the questions, while others frowned, frustrated by the public deconstruction unfolding before their eyes. It was at that moment that Liam made his final move. With calculated precision, he sent the question that would culminate the entire process. If wealth and position guarantee authority, why do we fail to recognize true hidden merits? Silence fell like a cloak. Ethan swallowed hard. The question wasn't just provocative, it was overwhelming. The audience, the experts, and even the moderator felt the immediate impact. The narrative built over years seemed to crumble in a matter of seconds, and the young boy, with his strategic intelligence, had become the epicenter of a historic turning point. Ethan attempted one last defense. "I can explain, but—" Her voice faltered. The weight of the words on the screen and the collective reaction crushed any attempt at control. The experts began to debate openly, some defending the validity of Liam's questions, others trying to salvage concepts of merit and effort. But each argument returned to the central point. The boy's logic could not be ignored. Ethan's narrative was fragmenting, not only before the public, but also in his own mind. For the first time, he was experiencing the vulnerability of someone who had never faced such a direct public defeat. At that moment, an unexpected twist occurred. One of the most influential experts, who had previously been neutral, stood up and declared, "All these questions touch on truths we can no longer ignore. We need to reconsider how we evaluate success and merit. The boy's perspective is not only valid, it's revolutionary. The impact was instantaneous. The audience erupted in murmurs and applause. Ethan, realizing there was no more room for control, took a step back. His expression changed. Pride and arrogance gave way to a silent understanding of the reality before him. For the first time, he acknowledged without words that he had underestimated not only a boy, but also the power of observation, strategy, and intelligence applied ethically. Nathan Hale, who had been watching everything closely, took a deep breath. Liam had achieved the pinnacle of his planned strategy. No direct exposure, no physical confrontations, no underhanded tactics. Analysis, patience, and strategy alone were enough to completely transform the course of events. Meanwhile, Liam felt an inner transformation. He had not only challenged a system, but also realized the extent of his own growth. Every question, every observation, every calculated move had required discipline, emotional intelligence, and quiet courage. He understood that real impact doesn't depend on status or recognition. It depends on precise action and ethical application at the right moment. The audience, now in a state of controlled euphoria, witnessed the shift in narrative. Ethan, speechless, began to organize his thoughts, realizing he needed to evolve, accept criticism, and rethink his relationship with authority and power. The protagonist's transformation was visible, no longer an arrogant millionaire, but a man aware of his own limitations and the complexity of the world around him. The climax had reached its peak. Every narrative thread converged on that explosion of tension, learning, and transformation. Liam had quietly reshaped perceptions, redefined concepts, and proven that humility, intelligence, and strategy can overcome arrogance and established power. The impact wasn't limited to the auditorium. Social media, live streams, and immediate comments amplified the boy's lesson, making him an instant reference for shrewdness, courage, and practical intelligence. Ethan, Nathan Hale, and all the experts present now understood that they had witnessed something unprecedented. The victory of a silent observer who never sought the spotlight, but who, even so, changed the course of the entire narrative. The climax was complete. The humble boy had triumphed, not through strength or wealth, but through strategic intelligence, ethics, and courage applied with precision. The transformation was visible in everyone involved, and the lesson would resonate far beyond that moment. The audience finally breathed a sigh of relief and admiration. The impact of Liam's actions echoed in every face, every gesture, and every comment. Ethan Walker, once unwavering, now walked silently across the stage, absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. For the first time, the millionaire realized that wealth, fame, and position did not guarantee absolute authority, and that underestimating someone based on appearance or age could be very costly. The experts, some surprised, others reflective, began to reorganize their own perceptions. Debates previously centered on formalities and statistics gave way to more human discussions about merit, real effort, and ethics. Liam's influence had been subtle but powerful. With precise actions and strategic questions, he had transformed the collective understanding of everyone present. Nathan Hale stayed close, carefully analyzing each move. Although he had initially worried about the potential for risk, he now clearly saw the depth of Liam's skill. The boy hadn't just reacted to unexpected situations, he had shaped the final outcome, showing maturity, strategy, and a sense of ethics uncommon for his age. Ethan, silent, began to engage in dialogue with some experts, no longer as an absolute master of the debate, but as someone willing to listen, learn, and reconsider. The change was not merely external. His posture, the tone of his voice, his body language, everything indicated transformation. He had learned in the most intense way that true recognition depends on genuine results and that power without wisdom is fragile. Liam, still in his discreet seat in the auditorium, felt a mixture of satisfaction and humility. His intention had never been to humiliate. His goal was to question, reflect, and provoke learning. He understood that true victory is not about showing superiority, but about inspiring change and opening new perspectives, even silently. The Mexican engineer, who had closely followed every movement, smiled discreetly. The system she had helped stabilize now functioned perfectly, but without erasing the effects of Liam's questions. Technology had served as a tool for reflection, not as a shield for manipulation. It was confirmation that ethics, skill, and conscious action could coexist to produce meaningful results. The audience began to disperse, but the energy of the event remained. Conversations arose spontaneously. Spectators discussed meritocracy, ethics, the perception of power, and the difference between wealth and practical intelligence. Liam's message resonated not only in the auditorium, but also on social media, live streams, and in the informal conversations that would spread in the following days. And in the end, a respectful silence filled the space. The conclusion of the experience wasn't just about an interrupted lecture or a confronted millionaire. It was about the practical demonstration that courage, strategic intelligence, and ethics can overcome any superficial advantage. The impact of the humble boy had become tangible, visible, and unforgettable. The story reached a conclusion that, while surprising, seemed inevitable. True power lies in doing the right thing, in the ability to recognize flaws, in the courage to question, and in the ethics of positively influencing, even when no one expects it. Months after the event, Liam's reputation grew quietly, not through fame, but through the silent respect of those who recognized his intelligence and ethics. Ethan Walker, transformed by the experience, began to listen more, question less, and value genuine merit. Nathan Hale remained attentive, observing the boy with admiration and caution, recognizing that his potential still had limits to explore. The auditorium, now remembered as the stage for an unexpected lesson, had become a reference point for future debates. And as the world moved on, the question Liam had asked remained: to what extent do wealth and position guarantee true authority?